Hello everyone and welcome to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage YouTube channel. No surprise, you are looking at a Kenmore made in Japan 1970s free arm sewing machine. This is part of a series of sewing machines that Sears was selling in the early 1970s through 1976, and then they would shift production from Japan to other countries. But I wanted to show this to you today because I just completed a restoration on a Kenmore free arm sewing machine. And we're in sewing season. That listing only lasted a few days and someone purchased it. But I wanted to show all of you this particular one. And over here you can see the sewing deck that I have removed. And if you look very closely, this machine looks almost exactly like the 158.1941, which was the model that you very often see with Kenmores, and it has, of course, all of the utility stitches. You see the orange and the white stitches. Of course, this machine does stretch stitches as well as standard, but there's something different. Those of you who've looked at enough of my videos, or maybe you just know Kenmore's really well, look very closely and see if you can tell me what is different about this machine from the last Kenmore free arm I just posted. And by the end of the video I'll explain what the difference is, but it's one of those things. I don't know if you guys have ever, you folks have ever seen one of those visual puzzles where it says, please see if you can identify something that is different, or not off, but just different, and you can compare it to the other videos I've done on Kenmore free arm sewing machines. So, made in Japan by the Marusan Manufacturing Company, all metal. This is part of the series that I describe as, one of the last great all metal machines before metal became a thing of the past and companies started moving increasingly towards plastic, which is one of the reasons many of you look for vintage sewing machines. It's not just because of how they look. You might be interested in the aesthetics, which is awesome, but for me it's really about how strong they were made and how they were made to be serviced. And I don't know if the retailers and the manufacturers ever envisioned that these things would last as long as they did, but gosh knows they did. So one of the things we can do, and we can look at to compare the last Kenmore I did, is that this machine that you're looking at now, if I go over here and grab the hand wheel, it doesn't move. It's fairly stiff. Now the last one you all saw was also, in fact, it was even stiffer, but that was because it sat, and it basically, I think it sat for 30 years, and it just was dry of oil, didn't have any oil in it. Well, this machine, I think as soon as I opened this up, I realized, oh, this is part of the reason that the needle doesn't want to move, because there's a nest of thread. Now, sewing machines were engineered knowing that there would be thread jams, right? So typically, the thread jam doesn't really hurt the machine. It just stops it from functioning. You can see me pulling out, and again, I want to be careful not to pull too hard. You can see here, I've got this wonderful extra lift that the Kenmores of this era are known for. This uses the super high shank foot with a nice quick release. Again, this was Sears' way of saying, if we can't sell Bernina, because Bernina only sold to independent dealers, by golly, we'll get a machine that, and they basically had the Japanese copy many of the Bernina features. The double belt system with a pulley that makes it so wonderfully strong. And it's all steel, right? It is all metal. Now, the 158-1941 that you saw recently has a lot of great features. Has stretch stitches, has all the utility stitches, but there are two things on this machine that give it away as a different model number. And again, just as we go through the video, maybe you'll pick up on it before, and hopefully I'll remember to tell you. So, what do I know? This machine is, it comes with its foot pedal and power cord, which are in fantastic shape. I love the Kenmore sewing motors from this era. They're all 1.2 amp, or most of them are 1.2. This one is. And they are very strong sewers. And by the 1970s, of course, you have the demand for stretch stitches, as I've mentioned before. Knitwear is a huge trend, massive fashion trend. It's like a just it's hard to overstate how popular it became. And people wanted to sew knits, and if you wanted to do that, you really benefited from a machine that could do stretch stitches. It made it easier. This is before home sergers would become a thing, right? So now, there actually, I'm going to point out, I'll just realize there are 3 things different about this machine that, and if you can just guess one of them, that's awesome, that are different from the 1941 model that I just did in the prior video. So, I will be basically going through this machine and doing what I do with all my machines, whether it is, you know, shiny and beautiful looking, or whether it has dust, and you know, this one has thread jams, doesn't matter. They all get the same treatment. So I'm going to be going through this, and I thought I'd make a video just about threads and thread jams, because they can be, again, the machines were engineered knowing this could happen. Typically, and I don't see it very often on this model because of the way its hand wheel is designed, but a lot of the older model vintage machines, you can get threads when people are winding bobbins. The old ones would, you know, sometimes the thread would wrap around the shaft of the hand wheel. More often you get thread jams down here, and we'll talk about that today. So didn't want to just make a video about, hey, guess why this machine is different. I want to have a little bit more than that. So with that, I'll get my tools and we'll start taking a look in here to see what we can see. Okay, so I've got my flashlight, my what do I call this? My headband mounted flashlight, so I can free up my hands, and I'm going to zoom in here a little bit for you folks, make sure that hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Of course, we'll start with removing the needle plate. That needs to be done regardless, because I always go in and clean feed dogs. If you never know, even feed dogs that are clean can have some lint, and I want, when the client gets the machine, to have a nice fresh start. And some people forget to clean their feed dogs. Again, the engineers knew that was very likely to happen. So these machines are very forgiving, and usually they'll speak to you not with an error code because there's no electronics in them, but you can, you know, once you get to know a machine, you'll know how it normally sounds, how it normally runs, and when it doesn't, if it's not quite doing what it normally does, you'll be able to tell either by its speed, its needle power, needle piercing power, or just the sound it makes. Now, you'll see this here. Let's see if I can get my needle up. Now, in this case, my needle is kind of hung up because I've got thread jams here, and you can see where I've got the plate moving. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this wonderful quick release, take the presser foot off, because it's not really, we don't really need the presser foot here at the moment. Let's see if it'll, well, actually, it's not going to come off until I get the needle up. So, need to kind of go in here and see if we can figure out, let's get the deck out of the way there, see if we can figure out, the jam is usually here almost always with where the hook is, right? So I know I've got, my plate wants to come off, but let's tilt back a bit and we'll see what we got. Okay, if you cannot do it from the top side, you want to go to the underside. By the underside, I mean underneath the needle plate. Get a little bit more of a zoom. Whoops, come here. All right, so now that I've got these flippers moved to the side, I think, we'll see if I can pull off the race cover. Right, that's something I would like to be able to do. And we'll see if it comes off, and if it comes off easily or not. It's funny the way thread, sometimes you get thread breaks, but it's kind of, I just think it's interesting that sometimes instead of a thread break, you get threads that are causing jams. See if I can get the needle up a little bit more out of the way. And but then of course when you have a thread jam, the thread doesn't want to break, right? It wants to be strong. So I'm wiggling until I found the space to get this out. And this would have had to come out anyway. I disassembled all of these. The race cover, the hook comes out, and these all get cleaned anyway, because usually that's not usually, they almost always need that. Now we can get in here and you see the underside, and now let's see what the needle will do. Now the needle wants to come all the way up. Okay, be careful of this. You know, this has got like a hinge here, and now let's see what we've got. We're back up top, and now I've gotten the needle to come up enough to clear out both the presser foot, which was going to come off, and now if you look here, we've got cloth, and we've got really the jam. Look at this. You can see the cloth went down into the needle plate opening. It's not a problem. In fact, in this particular case, the needle plate is designed, the center of it comes out because you have, this is the most common one that's used, and again, it plops right out in case you want to exchange it. And now I have pulled that fabric and thread. There we go. So it looked daunting, and I'm showing all of you this because if you're new to sewing machines or vintage machines, maybe you have one you want to restore and you think, oh no, how am I going to do this? Am I going to hurt the machine? Be patient, go slow, don't get in a hurry. And when I first just did this here in the video, I didn't know where exactly, you know, did I know if the thread jam was at the top or the bottom? I wasn't really sure. So you just you poke around. Now, deep down behind here, I see little dust bunnies, or lint bunnies I should call them, and that's again not unusual. You could take, as long as you've got all your parts out, your bobbin case and everything, you can take a vacuum and vacuum some of this out. I may do that, but I'll actually, if you don't, I have a small vacuum attachment to my vacuum cleaner that's designed for computers, and it has little tiny tools that you can use. But if not, again, this is one of the little tools that I have. You may have one of your own, and you can literally, you can just start pulling out some of this lint. Again, this is not hurting anything, but you don't want to leave it in here because, first of all, we need to clean it. The main thing lint can do like this, it looks like a little bunny, a big bunny actually. What it will do is sometimes it'll just simply create a drag on the machine and slow it down. And obviously I'm going to be putting a little bit of oil on the race when I go to put the hook back in. And I definitely don't want dust mixing with that oil and just making a mess. And this is part of caring for a machine. The instruction manual, here's more of it. Again, the instruction manual will tell you, hey, clean the lint. So as you can see, I'm just pulling out the giant chunks here, and we'll probably get my vacuum out at some point to make sure I've gotten it all. You can also, some people will use canned air, compressed air in a can to blow it. The only problem with that is you might end up blowing dust into other parts of the machine you didn't want it in either. So I think the vacuum is one of the better ideas, at least for me. That's what I have found. You may have a better technique, and if you do, always feel free to share that in the comments. That's how we all learn, right? So, and you can see what I'm doing here. I'm basically cleaning out, and there's even some here. If I turn the hand wheel, which moves a little bit better now that I've gotten all those tangles out, you can see, I've got some lint that's kind of, and this, this little piece of thread here. I don't know if you guys saw it fall. Let's see if I can pick it up here for you. It's tiny. What happens with a lot of times a piece of thread will break off. Okay, now it doesn't want to come up. Well, anyway, it's about 3/4 of an inch long, and it doesn't look like much, but thread remnants, little broken pieces of thread, can create problems. Again, they don't break the machine, they just stop the machine from running properly. So again, and I see more up here in the back, if you can see, I think you can see, again, more more lint wanting to come out. So again, that's one of the places you want to check. Obviously, you also want to check up top, and normally, of course, you want to start above because gravity is going to pull things down. And notice I didn't. So if some of this comes down, you may have to clean your machine more than once if you start down below. But I'm getting lucky here. I'm getting the lint, and you can see I'm actually getting it here between the little feed dogs. The feed dogs on these Kenmores are wide and strong. They're wonderful for feeding fabric. And I've got yet more dust bunnies up here top. So I think I'll go and get my vacuum. In fact, I'll just use the shop vac and I'll vacuum it out. It's not hard, obviously. If you have a shop vac, it doesn't have to be that brand, but that's the one I happen to have. You can actually take the shop vac, and again, they have a little accessory set. You know, they always have upgrades, just like sewing machines did, and you can use that to sort of funnel down into a very narrow suction end piece, and you can get in here and pull out the dust. It's just easier to deal with, I think, anyway. Now, what else do we have? Let's take a look while we're here. I see dust and fuzz here around the needle area. Again, don't let this bother you if you get a machine, because the machines, you know, it was always envisioned that machines could get dusty and dirty. They're sewing machines, and you have lint. But good news is that was one of the main things causing the lack of movement. And if you didn't know that, and the main purpose of this video is to remind you, do not assume that the machine is broken. Never throw a machine away or put it in the garbage because you think it won't run. Because again, the vast majority of the times, it's not serious. Now, it's going to take a lot of time to go through this and clean it. I've got to get all the lint out. Then I've got to start checking. I'm going to be going through and checking the belts, doing all of the things that I do to a machine to get it fully overhauled. If someone ever tells you, let's say they have a machine for sale and they say, had a recent tune-up, that's not enough information. You need to know, well, what did they do? You know, if it turns out they took it to a sewing repair place and that place fixed something, or maybe they cleaned some of the lint out, oiled it, and handed it back to the customer, that does not pass for overhauling a sewing machine. Now, if a machine has been used, it's been maintained, and it's running great, and it just needs, that's what you might call a light tune-up. Nothing wrong with that, but you can do that with vintage machines. You can do that yourself. You don't need to take that into a sewing shop. However, when you get a machine like this, you will be tempted, some people will be tempted to, boy, I can get this machine for $20 or $50 or what have you. And they think, well, that's great, you know, and they think they're going to take it home and sew with it. You might get lucky and do that. That is possible, but it's unlikely. Most of the time, what you get are machines that have been sitting, somebody didn't know what to do, maybe they didn't know where a part went, you know, there are any number of reasons, but it is not ready to sit down and get going with a sewing project. And that is why my clients purchase machines from me, and they know from the listings that I post, I try to give as exhaustive a list of the things I have done for to the machine as possible. And I emphasize that occasionally parts do need to be replaced, but that's very unusual. Normally, it's just simply the hours. It takes a lot of hours to take a machine that has been sitting for years, that has not had maintenance, and literally go through. Remember, it's a mechanical device. It is steel, and it is heirloom quality, but anything made that is mechanical needs maintenance. Your maintenance, when it's done, all you're going to need to do is clean your feed dogs and oil the machine with a project, and you should be good to go. If you get a machine that's been fully gone through, and when I say fully, I mean the bottom tray's coming out. We're going to, like I say, vacuum this out, clean. I've got to go in there with alcohol and clean before I lubricate. Going to do the same thing up here, And basically, just to sort of summarize, typically the areas that require, when you say, well, what does that mean, full overhaul? Yeah, I talk about the hours. Well, you've got many sections of a machine. Most vintage sewing machines, you've got a top section, a drivetrain up here. This lid will come off, and I'll be going through everything up here, checking it out, making sure it's clean. Typically, you don't find a lot of dust up here. You usually find old oil and grease. That needs to be cleaned. The whole thing needs to be lubricated and unfrozen if it happens to be frozen. Remember, the more features a sewing machine has, the more labor it takes. The average straight stitch machine takes less time. Now I say average, there are exceptions. The average one takes less time than a machine like this because there's a lot more going on mechanically with these. The quality is just as good. It just takes longer for me to go through them because, again, there's just lots of features. That doesn't mean they're more prone to problems, but they do require more time. Then after the top, of course, you have the side section on the left. This is where your presser bar and, very importantly, your needle bar and your zigzag mechanism all come together over here. And they got to be serviced in this section. And of course, I just mentioned I'll be cleaning and eventually lubricating this area here. And then, of course, the bottom tray comes off, and all of the mechanical drivetrain underneath needs to be cleaned, lubricated, and we're not done yet. Right? And then when we come around to the other side, on this particular series of Kenmores, the side panel here comes off, and I have access to my belts. I need to inspect my belts. If the belts are fine, no problem. If I need to replace them, I can get replacement belts. They're not hard to get, and you replace those belts over here. The Kenmore belts are known for being really good quality, but you always want to check them. And then, of course, when I have the lid off while I'm dealing with the upper side, I'll also be inspecting the bobbin winder, because the bobbin winder mechanism is actually underneath. It's on the bottom side of the top lid. And what else? I'll be checking out the foot pedal, checking out the cord. So all of this needs to be looked at, and because you can't assume, you don't know if is the machine in, it could be in perfect condition. But I always like to go through them. That way I can say I know I did. I've gone through every section, and I don't have to guess. Guessing is not good. And if you're going to pay someone for a fully overhauled sewing machine, that's what you're after, right? Otherwise, you could just go and buy it for 30, 40 bucks. Sometimes more. It depends on the machine. I've given as much as $100 for a machine that needed restoring before. But are you going to restore the machine? Are you going to pay someone to do it for you? I have people who have said, hey, if I find a machine that I like, let's say I don't have one in my own stock, and they say, if I find a machine, can I bring it to you? And I say, absolutely, because of course I take on other people's machines, which is nice because then I don't have to store them. But I often say, if there's a way possible, please send me a photo of that machine and check with me, because just to make sure it's a model that I think is going to be, I can get parts for. Most of them I can. There's a few exceptions. Some of the European machines are a pain, but any machine that was built in massive quantities, whether it was Singer, White, Kenmore, these brands sold millions of sewing machines over the decades. I'm not exaggerating. So there's lots of parts out there, reproduction parts and so forth. Anyway, I just wanted to show this to you all, and now, because I promised to reveal the three things that are different. On the 1941 model, there is where's my sewing deck? On the sewing deck, in order to get it to release, there is a button, like down here, right around here. You push it in and it releases. On this model, the button is back here on the top. They moved it. I don't know why. I have no clue as to why they moved it, but you can see right there. Can you see? Yes, there's like a little button here you push down. This one will need cleaning, a little stiff coming off, but that's just because it had some old oil. Alcohol will take care of that and it'll slide beautifully. This is the same. So, okay, so the first thing they changed was where the release button is. So if you got a 1941 and you got this, you're like, hey, how do I get the sewing deck off? Well, they moved it over here. What else did they do? Well, look up top, guys, folks, guys and gals, and let's zoom in. If you remember the 1941 model, it had everything you see here, except this one adds something. Notice it says cam. Well, there's a reason. Because, let me zoom in more, make sure you can see where it says cam. The 1941 doesn't have that. This is a 158.1931. Same quality. Virtually most everything is the same except for, again, the sewing deck release, this little mention of cam, and the reason it says that is it has a place to insert cams. So, for all of the expense that people had in buying the Kenmore 1941, it had all these wonderful utility stitches. And these stitches were very important. They were selected for a reason, and it had a lot to do with sewing both wovens and knit fabrics. But there was always, you know, manufacturers, they said, yes, wait, but wouldn't you like to have a model where you could do decorative stitching? Okay. And decorative stitching allows you to insert a cam. Now those cams, unlike the built-in cams here that are all steel, the accessory cams are plastic, but it's okay. That's not an issue. As long as it's not built into the machine, I don't mind if the cam is plastic. And you can see here, there is a, there's like a place where you seat those cams and you put them in place. And we'll talk about that in a different video. But there you go. So just when you thought you had the fanciest Kenmore in the 1941, I don't know why this has a, they all have different numbers, and I don't know why this one's 1931. I don't know why they had the nomenclature the way they did. The point is, when I mentioned, and I have mentioned this in other videos, when I say that Sears Kenmore sewing machine brand, just like Singer, they had a ton of models. I mean, you're not talking about 2 or 3 models to pick from. You're talking about tens of models in any given year, because every time they added a feature, they could add to the price. But take away a feature, they could lower the price. That way, the goal was when you had a customer come into the store or going through the Wishbook catalog, because Sears still had their catalog back in the 70s, you know, if you wanted more features, well, they had it if you were willing to pay. But if you were on a tighter budget and you said, well, I don't know if I can afford that one, oh, not to worry. We have one just priced for you. And automobiles used to be like this. And you know, even today, you know, you can go shopping for kitchen appliances and you'll still see that. Well, if you want certain features, you pay more. But here it is, the Kenmore 158.1931. You saw I almost slipped there. Again, one of the many great machines that Sears sold once upon a time. And I am going to be going through this one as I go through all of them. As you can see, it has the modifier. It has the stretch stitch capability. But it has free arm. It's convertible. Obviously, you take the deck off. It converts to a free arm, thus the name. And very expensive to purchase back in the 70s. But still an amazing machine. And it has just been like virtually all the machines I get. Occasionally, I find the rare unicorn that just, you know, I go through the whole thing and I clean it and lubricate it. But I would say 95% of all of the machines that I work on, they need to be woken up after a long slumber or hibernation. But once they are, I believe they will outsew any new machine you can get a hold of. And even though this machine is a half-century old, it's a very good chance that it will outlast any brand new plastic machine you buy today. And that says more about what's available today in sewing machines than it even does about what you know, prior generations bought back in the 70s. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next video.